Okay, I wanted to record a lecture for you regarding Patricia Hill Collins' concepts of intersectionality and matrices of oppression. It's it can be a complex article for some people, but I think it's an important conflict theory perspective, and intersectionality, very important theory and concept in sociology as well, and for all of us in society to get a good grasp on this concept and philosophy. So let me go to screen share and try to keep it a little bit short and to the point as you have the article. So, but I just wanted to give a little bit of explanation. Sometimes people do better with audio or visual learning. So this is as an extra input of information for you. So let's go to the PowerPoint and we will go. Okay, so intersectionality and the matrix of domination or matrices of domination is from the article that's assigned this week. It's not by Patricia Hill Collins, but it is a well-written piece about Patricia Hill Collins, and well, not about her as much as about her ideas of intersectionality and the matrix of domination. So she starts by talking about epistemology, which is knowing and knowledge, and how do we know what we know. Um, that's kind of what epistemology is. And she talks about philosophies of knowing, and there are different philosophies of knowing and how we gain knowledge. As an example, she talks about and compares and contrasts empiricism, which is measurable, objective, typically quantitative, but it can also be qualitative, but typically quantitative, versus a rationalism perspective, which is using logic and reasoning. Now, empiricism is not absent of reasoning and logic. It's just the foundation is empirical, objective, that there is a truth, that it's measurable. Rationalism is more about thinking, um, uh, making common sense, logical hypotheses, and supporting those with reasoning. Okay. Karl Marx said, quote, "The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch, are in every epoch of ruling ideas. The class which is ruling," and of course he was focused on social class, so capitalist versus blue collar or labor or working class, proletariat, the bourgeoisie at the top, the proletariat at the working. So he's saying that the capitalist class, which is the ruling class, ruling the material force of society, is at the same time its ruling intellectual force or its cultural ideas, knowledge, information, social norms, beliefs, values, and that there's this cultural hegemony where we, as the proletariat, agree to and take on these ideas of the ruling class, and that's cultural hegemony. So those, which isn't always necessarily in our best interest. It's in the best interest of the ruling class. And it is, empiricism is a Western way of knowing. It's a positivistic approach. Um, it is a scientific method, testing knowledge, building on top of knowledge, standing up to criticism, holding up your thesis and research to be poked at and prodded and challenged. And if it stands those challenges, then it's given credence. Okay. But Black feminist epistemology that Collins um, supports and acknowledges as maybe there's another way, might be a better way, is knowledge is built upon lived experience, not upon objective position. That the use of dialogue rather than adversarial debate, and we talked about the Western idea of, adversarial, Socratic debate, right? But a dialogue of how do we dialogue to achieve a better outcome for all of us, rather than that adversarial debate. And number three is knowledge is value laden. Okay, so our knowledge is biased by our values and beliefs and should be tested by the presence of values like empathy and compassion for the greater good, rather than, say, a value free, empirical, objective research and support. And then the fourth and last one, she requires personal accountability. She says, Black feminist epistemology, it requires personal accountability, which what she means by that is that the knowledge, once you have this knowledge, it requires a certain level of responsibility and action to bring forth and move toward a greater well-being for all. Intersectionality. Okay, let's take a definition of that first. Intersectionality is a particular way, okay, of understanding our social location in terms of crisscross systems of oppression. Okay, I think probably the key phrase in here for at this point in this lecture is social location. What is your social location? Okay, if on the vertical axis it's power. Up high is power, down low is oppression or less power. And then the horizontal axis is the group that you're part of and how far out from the norm of society, how far out horizontally, how far out is your location, that social distance, right? The social location, and you can measure social distance from the social norm or what is considered the dominant culture. So you can be high in power, low in power, and then usually what we do is when we map out social location, we usually do it in one dimension: gender, social class, but you can also do it with multiple status identities. So your identity, and we all have multiple identities. So it's more than just one or two identities on this social location. There's multiple identities: age, gender, religion, spirituality, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. All these areas are part of who we are. We're not just white or black, rich or poor, old or young, gay or straight, Christian or agnostic, two-parent home, one-parent home, sexually harassed, not sexually harassed, tall, short, beautiful as by the social construction of society or not. And you can continue to layer in what our different identities are. Also our social status, our social location, which I just explained a little bit ago, and the stratification of power on the horizontal. Okay. Okay, let's see here. And then your lived experience. What's your lived experience in that social location? Intersectionality, it is an analysis claiming that systems of race, social class, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, nation, and age form, as well as other things, form mutually constructing features of social organization which shape a group's identity experience. So if you're part of a group within a larger society, your experience is shaped, right, by that society and that society's dominant culture, values, beliefs, ways of thinking, ways of doing life, ways of acting, social norms, ways of believing, right? Culture. Okay. And here's an example. So your race, your ethnicity, your religion, language, heritage, history, immigration status, gender, family status, income, aboriginality, ability, geographic location, yeah, or even not only regional and cultural, but rural, city, suburb, age, sexuality, occupation, education, right? and race. So there's, as you can see, and there's many more. Some have greater social distance from the social norm, and others are, some are very close to that social norm, the cultural norm, the dominant cultural norm, and some are further out. But then you account for all of these in this very complex identity of who each of us are as individuals and as groups. The matrix of domination refers to the overall organization of power in a society. Okay, so the matrix of domination looks at social structures of power within a society. Any specific matrix has a particular arrangement of intersecting systems of oppression based on specific histories and societies. So every society has, every culture, every large culture, even every group, even small subcultures have a matrix that is a particular arrangement of intersecting systems. And each group has a dominant culture. So each subculture has a dominant subculture within a dominant culture. Okay, and even a global culture, which is right now I would say is the Western culture or white culture. Intersecting systems of oppression are specifically organized through 4 interrelated domains of power that all exist with the same social influences of structure and power that influence and impact the way we think of ourselves, how we act and interact with society, and these norms, values, beliefs, ideas, social norms. And they are structural, disciplinary, hegemonic, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, and interpersonal. And let's take a look at each one of these separately. But before we do, let's take a look at a visual, and we'll come back to this visual as well. So you can pause it here and kind of read this on your own. And then I'm going to go through slide by slide. If you like this, then you can pause it here, but I'm going to move on. Okay, so the structural domain, the first domain that Collins talks about, consists of social structures, right? Social structures such as law, politics or polity, religion, the economy, education, government, the justice system, the military. Those are all now law, polity, religion, and economy are the pretty big ones. Are probably the most influential ones. Organization, institutions, and the arrangements that they have. An example would be legally, Blacks could not legally vote until 1870. However, voting didn't become a real reality for most Blacks and for many Black Americans until the Civil Rights Act of 1965, because of Jim Crow laws, oppressions at voter polls, poll taxes, things like that, which then officially ended the Jim Crow era around 65. I'd say 67, but anyway, different people have different perspectives of when the Civil Rights era ended. Okay, the second one is the disciplinary domain. Okay, and the disciplinary, right, it's about social control, right, manages oppression through bureaucratic organizations whose task it is to control and organize human behavior through routinization, rationalization, and surveillance, right? So the criminal justice system would be a good example of a disciplinary domain. It's the management of the rules of the game that are enforced by the dominant cultural, by the dominant culture, and that culture's values, beliefs, norms, behaviors. Systemic discrimination and oppression comes through government organizations, the criminal justice system, schools, and private organizations, employment, compensation, etc. An example would be schools, say K through 12, tend to suspend students of color at higher rates than whites, which results in missed days of school and learning, and often affecting academic performance. Okay. The third one is hegemonic domain. Now, cultural hegemony, right, which is Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian right around the Second World War, and he was kind of speaking out against Mussolini and the social control and authority. And he couldn't seem to get people riled up about the oppression that they were feeling because they bought into the belief that and Mussolini was a big Italian nationalist. So yes, we're Italians, and that seemed to satisfy the inequalities and poverty of the proletariat of Italy. So he kind of was protesting against that. Mussolini threw him in jail, and Gramsci came up with this philosophy or concept of cultural hegemony. The American dream, that we can all achieve the American dream and that we have this social mobility available to all of us, right, is an example of cultural hegemony. It is the ideological glue that cuts across all domains and permeates the levels of power. Okay, it is made up of the language we use. So language, which is part of culture, and obviously the dominant culture, the images we respond to, and the meaning we give those, the values and beliefs we hold, and the ideas that we entertain. Produced, reinforced, and expressed, these cultural ideas are through school curriculum, textbooks, religious teachings, mass media, community cultures, etc. An example would be religious beliefs and values that favor, for example, male leadership or heterosexuality, decision-making, male leadership, decision-making, and the knowledge are reinforced in a patriarchal system, which results in inequality and oppression. And the final one is interpersonal domain. And the interpersonal domain, it influences everyday life through personal relationships that we maintain, as well as the different interactions that make up our daily life. So this, which is kind of a symbolic interactionist approach, this interpersonal, how we socially construct ideas, groups, the meaning we give to those groups, right? And if we give a negative meaning to a group, that's a matrix of domination for that group within the interpersonal domain. And we'll talk more about that in the next week or two, hopefully in week 4. It's through lived experience and consciousness. We tend to identify with an oppression that we often experience firsthand and consider all other oppressions as being less important, which is kind of what I call the major surgery, minor surgery difference, right? Minor surgery is when you're on the operating table. Major surgery is when I'm on the operating table, right? And so this calls for what sometimes we refer to as intellectual empathy, right? As being able to understand a different social location than your own, or a different life narrative or story than your own. An example would be a Black heterosexual woman may discriminate against lesbians without a second thought, or a Black Southern Baptist woman may believe that every school classroom ought to display the 10 Commandments. And then here's this structure again, if you want another second look at it. So I would maybe pause it and take some time and kind of read over it a little bit. But I want to end with one last slide. And that is just a refresher. I think we may have gone over this in class, but this fits within intersectionality and the domain of the matrices of oppression. Okay, so I like this explanation of white culture, whiteness. That's right here in this gray strip at the top. White dominant culture, or whiteness, refers to the ways white people and their traditions, attitudes, and ways of life, which is basically culture, have been normalized. So the dominant culture becomes normalized as the culture over time, and are now considered standard practices or norms, standard practices in the United States. And since white people still hold most of the institutional power in America, we have all internalized some aspects of white culture, including people of color. So we've internalized these ideas. We've internalized white culture. Some people would say we've internalized racism. Okay. I don't want to get too bogged down in the jargon because there's a lot of meaning that's packed in there, and we can discuss it. Um, but I hope that you will come to better understand this concept and perspective and philosophy. So, what is the white culture? It believes in rugged individualism. The individual is the primary unit, self-reliance, independence, and autonomy, highly valued and rewarded. Individuals assumed to be in control of their environment. You get what you deserve. So, kind of a meritocratic perspective, right? That's a very white Western culture, okay? As opposed to more of a collectivist, value laden perspective. Family structure, the nuclear family, father, mother, 2.3 children, husband and breadwinner, the head of the household. Wife is homemaker and subordinate to the husband. Children should have their own rooms and be independent. Very Western culture, very white culture, right? Emphasis on scientific method. And this is why I put this in here, because I hope you can start to see um, the intersectionality and the matrix of domination starting to be expressed as it's applied to this idea of what white culture or whiteness is, right? Objective, rational, linear thinking, cause and effect relationships, quantitative emphasis, as opposed to narrative, storytelling, uh, um, experience, right? Experiential understanding and knowledge. And then history based on Northern European immigrants' experiences in the United States. Heavy focus on the British Empire, the primacy of Western and Judeo-Christian tradition, Protestant work ethic. Okay, hard work is the key to success. Work before play. I mean, you can start to see, man, these are American values, right? Well, they represent the dominant culture, which is the Western European white culture. If you didn't meet your goals, you didn't work hard enough, right? And then religion. Christianity is the norm. Anything other than Judeo-Christian tradition is foreign. No tolerance for deviation from a single God or a monotheistic religion. And then um, and then we have status, power, and authority. Wealth is your worth. Your job is who you are. Respect authority. Heavy value on ownership of goods, space, and property. Okay, time, follow a rigid time schedule. Time viewed as a commodity instead of like maybe a mindfulness or kind of a kuna matata, relationally driven perspective. It's about status, power, wealth, time, and future orientation, planning, delayed gratification. Progress is always best. Tomorrow will be better. Okay, and then aesthetics are based on European culture. A steak and potatoes, bland is best taste. Women's beauty based on blonde, thin Barbie, kind of a Eurocentric, white, dominant beauty culture. Man's attractiveness based on economic status, power, and intellect, right? So women are sex objects, men are success objects. And then holidays based on Christian religions, based on white history and male leaders. And then justice based on English common law, which our system is, protects property and entitlements, and intent, your intent counts, okay? And then competition, be number one, win at all costs, winners and loser dichotomy, action oriented, master and control nature. So it's about power and control. Must always do something about a situation, aggressiveness and extroversion. Decision making, majority rules when whites have power. Okay. And then communication, the King's English rules, written tradition, avoid conflict, intimacy, don't show emotion, don't discuss personal life, be polite. So I just thought I'd put that at the end of this so that you can actually start to see, or hopefully you can connect the dots and start to see how that intersectionality and white cultural hegemony and those domains of structures in the domain of the matrices of oppression. So hopefully that works good for you as kind of a pre-lecture to your reading this week. It can be, as like I said, if you've not been introduced to these concepts, it can be maybe a little challenging. And so that's it. So I hope that works for you, and look forward to our conversation on that. All right, talk to you later.